Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, week 106 of Russian invasion of Ukraine, and this is the first week of March 2024. In today's podcast, we're going to talk about the updates from the front lines, the updates from the Avdiivka region. Big news: Ukrainians sank another Russian Navy ship by five Navy drones, and we're gonna cover Putin's ambitions way beyond Ukraine. So, the latest updates from the Avdiivka region. The withdrawal of our troops from Avdiivka was a big loss for our state because Avdiivka is the largest ridge in the area and the best defense position. Therefore, of course, the enemy has now captured these most advantageous positions and received an opportunity to shell our positions more successfully, leading to more losses in Ukrainian forces. The village of Stepove, Birdichi, Lastochkina, and Orlivka, for which battles are currently taking place, are all located in the lowlands. So the enemy has opportunity to shell our positions from the highlands. Of course, defense of these lowlands is very difficult from a tactical point of view and is no longer beneficial for us, especially in conditions where drones are the main factor of combat operations which dictate tactics on the battlefield. The availability of convenient places in the heights for launching drones and high quality protective structures for drone operators give drone operators a decisive advantage on the battlefield. The enemy uses this advantage with some success. In these difficult conditions, which are already unfavorable for us, the enemy bears significantly greater losses than our soldiers. And I'm saying that not because I'm Ukrainian, but that's the reality. Our soldiers do everything possible and even impossible to stop the enemy in such conditions and inflict losses on them. Now our artillery and our drones are working there, and all this is a very difficult for the enemy as well, because the enemy has to take the new villages and the new settlements at any cost, throwing more and more people in the battle. When you look at the insane losses the Russians are suffering and how they are constantly being knocked out day after day, this is not a problem for Putin because he will recruit more Russian citizens from poor regions of the country where salary is approximately $150 to $200 a month, and these people are actually happy to fight for $1,000 or $1,500 salary in Ukraine. Unfortunately, our defeats include the loss of Bakhmut and Avdiivka, as well as the loss of Lysychansk Severodonetsk agglomeration. We lost nodes that were very advantageous for defense, ridges of height that allowed us to restrain the enemy with small forces and cause him many times greater losses. These were built up agglomerations which were in themselves protection and camouflage from the constant strikes of Russian aircraft and artillery. Therefore, a battle in the city is much more profitable for our infantry, provided the enemy has the advantage of fire than a battle in an open field. Therefore, the loss of these positions significantly weakened the Ukrainian troops and led and will lead to increase in losses. The battles on the outskirts of Bakhmut are now tactically disadvantageous for us. The enemy relies on heights on the build-up area. All its rare evacuation points and command posts are now in Bakhmut. Now, now these positions are actually putting our whole forces in the regions within several kilometers range in huge danger. So everything is not going at our advantage at the moment while we're struggling to get more aid from our Western allies and experiencing shortage of ammunitions, shells, and also people. For the first time since the war started, Russian invaders destroyed the first Ukrainian HIMARS. Early for years, the Russian General Staff announced the defeat of many dozens of HIMARS used by Ukrainians, but there were never any confirmation or evidence. But it was simply propaganda that Russians love. Unfortunately, this time the Russian posted a video recorded from the drone during the attack on one of Ukrainian positions where the HIMARS was stationed. A Russian drone noticed and observed HIMARS' departure to a combat position which was about 40 kilometers from the front line. HIMARS stopped, waited for the command to work, and lingered on the point without opening fire. The Russians had time to determine coordinates, prepare the data for firing, and inflict damage with a long range guided missile. This was not an ambush or a leak. Russia has dramatically increased the number of long range drones that monitor the communications of Ukrainian forces over a considerable distance. The Ukrainian air defense doesn't have enough means to cover the rear and shoot down Russian drones. A delay of even half an hour in the position can allow the enemy to inflict damage even at such significant depth. When using HIMARS missile systems, the Ukrainian command didn't provide the HIMARS calculation with information about the Russian drone's location in the area of the starting position. Radar and electronic intelligence systems didn't work there at the moment, and there was no interaction or information transmission. In any case, movement at the cost of combat equipment and personnel, even at a distance of 40-50 kilometers without air defense cover and without informing about the presence of Russian drones, is a serious tactical miscalculation, and the reason is partly due to the problems of insufficient members and organization of the air defense system, and partly to the underestimation of the risk by the command of the missile and artillery troops in the area. We all hope that the conclusions of this military of our military leaders will be made in more detail and further losses will be avoided. The Russians are trying to do everything to disrupt the highly effective operations of HIMARS systems, which constantly deliver murderous blows to the enemy, to the Russian soldiers, to the Russian airplanes, and to the Russian Navy. Well, last week, Ukrainian forces had a big success, sinking the Navy ship Kotov. Ukraine's military on Tuesday claimed another successful attack on a Russian warship, marking the latest in a string of naval defeat for Moscow's Black Sea Fleet, reducing the number of Russian ships by more than a third since the start of the war in February 2022. The Defense Intelligence of Ukraine said maritime drones operated by its Group 13 special unit struck and sank the 1,300-ton Russian patrol ship Sergei Kotov in the Black Sea near the Kerch Strait that separates occupied Crimea from the coast of southwest Russia. As a result of the strike by Ukrainian newly made Magura V5 maritime drones, the Russian ship Project 22160 Sergei Kotov sustained damage to the stern, starboard, and port sides, sparking a fire aboard the vessel, the statement said. The military later confirmed the ship had sunk. In addition, it added that the mission was conducted in cooperation with the Ukrainian Navy and with the support of Ukraine's military of digital transformation. 7 Russian crew members were killed and 27 military personnel were wounded, according to the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine. The naval forces of Russia tried to transport the ship to the Feodosia seaport after the damage, but by transporting the ship went down under the water. The Russians also had weapons on the ship and Ka 29 shipborne combat transport helicopter. Ukraine's maritime drones have taken a heavy toll on Russian naval ships, especially in the past few months. With its campaign in the Black Sea, a rare strategic success for Kiev compared to recent setbacks on the battlefield. In mid February, the Russian landing ship Cesar Kunikov was attacked with the same type of drones we used against Sergei Kotov. The drones punctured critical holes on the Russians' ship's left side before sinking it. The Ukrainian military intelligence confirmed this information. Early in February, Ukraine claimed its forces had disabled about 33% of Russia's warships, among to 24 disabled ships and one submarine. Russia's worst naval loss of the war was the sinking of the guided missile cruiser Moskva in April 2022. So the Sergei Kotov ship was one of the Russians' newest ships in the Black Sea Fleet and just recently joined the Russian Black Sea Fleet. So, according to intelligence, the 300-foot long or 91 meters warship had a range of 6,000 nautical miles, could carry a crew of 80 people, and was equipped with a helicopter, a 57 millimeter gun, and a modern air defense systems. Ukraine said it had a price tag of about $65 million. So on February 26th this year, Ukraine marked the second anniversary of Russia's full scale invasion. Let's talk about how the Russian rhetoric have changed over these last 2 years. In recent weeks, more and more Western leaders have publicly warned that their countries may soon be the target of Russian aggression. Not everyone, unfortunately, believes that Putin will try to target the other European countries. Many are still skeptical and claim that the Russian dictator is only interested in Ukraine. Others point to the Russian military's well documented difficulties during the current invasion as proof that the Russian attack on the NATO alliance would be tantamount to military suicide. These arguments reflect the fundamental inability of many in the West to understand the true motivation for the Russian invasion and the nature of the threat posed by Volodymyr Putin. When Putin first launched a full scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, he initially tried to present it as a defensive measure against Ukrainian Nazis and NATO expansion. However, as the conflict progressed, it became increasingly apparent that the Kremlin was waging an old fashioned colonial war of imperial expansion. In the summer of 2022, Putin directly compared his invasion to the 18th century imperial conquests of Russian Tsar Peter the Greatest. A few months later, he announced the annexation of the four Ukrainian regions, declaring them historically Russian lands. Since then, he claims that no Ukraine has ever existed in the history of mankind and issues orders to eradicate all traces of Ukrainian national identity in the territories of Ukraine controlled by the Kremlin. Putin's historical motivations were perhaps most evident during the recent interviews with American media Tucker Carlson. While Carlson openly urged Putin to blame NATO and the US for the invasion, the Russian ruler chose to launch into a half-hour history lecture in which the origins of the current war were relegated to the distant past. Instead of trying to justify his invasion in terms of modern geopolitics, Putin decided to declare that Ukraine was historically Russian territory and therefore a legitimate target for him. Putin's dire dream of returning historically Russian land carries a threat to many other countries as well, because they may suffer the same fate as Ukraine. The Kremlin dictator is notorious for lamenting the collapse of the Soviet Union, but his revisionist ambitions extend beyond the former USSR. Putin has repeatedly expressed his conviction that the Soviet Union was a continuation of the Russian Empire and that the collapse of the USSR was the collapse of historical Russia. What was built over 1,000 years has largely been lost, he commented. He commented on December 2021. Based on this perverse logic, the historical argument used by Putin to justify the invasion of Ukraine can be equally applied to any country that was once part of the Russian Empire. As a result, the list of potential targets could include Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Poland, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, all of the Central Asia, not to mention Alaska. Everyone who is inclined to reject the idea of a Russian invasion of these countries should think about the fact that just 10 years ago, most Ukrainians were equally sure of the impossibility of such a thing in 21st century. And now we see this is the reality. Putin is also driven not only by his deep desire to reverse Russia's imperial decline, he also sees the invasion of Ukraine as a struggle to end the era of Western domination and establish a new multipolar world order. After decades spent resenting Russia's declining status and what he perceived as the humiliations of the post Soviet period, he is now trying to frame the war in Ukraine as a battle against uh, Americans to define the future of international relations. Putin believes that the victory over Ukraine will be a decisive breakthrough that will undermine the entire world order that has been established since 1991 and will turn back the verdict of the Cold War. Doubters argue that the Russian military is now unable to mount any further incursions, let alone confront the military might of NATO itself. These arguments look convincing at first glance. After all, Putin's army reputation as the number two army in the world suffered greatly in the war against Ukraine. Russian commanders have lost a number of key battles and suffered catastrophic losses in men and equipment, leaving them increasingly dependent on the brute force of primitive human wave tactics. Despite these setbacks, it would be unwise to underestimate Russia's military potential. Over the past 2 years, Putin has put the entire Russian economy on military rails. Weapons factories work around the clock. In terms of the number of produced artillery shells and other key types of weapons, they already significantly exceed everything that NATO alliance can offer. Russia may have lost hundreds of thousands killed and wounded in Ukraine, but the Kremlin still has vast untapped reserves of fighting age men that can be mobilized before the next major invasion. Most importantly, success in Ukraine would provide Putin with a huge additional boost while simultaneously destabilizing and demoralizing the entire democratic world. Inside Russia, pro war sentiment would increase and Putin's messianic vision of a new Russian empire would be confirmed. On the international stage, Russia's existing allies will feel free to step up their support, while non aligned countries of the global south will rush to strengthen ties with the Kremlin. In such a favorable geopolitical climate, it will be undoubtedly difficult for Putin to resist the temptation to escalate the confrontation with the West. Moreover, He will almost certainly see this as a once in a lifetime opportunity to fulfill his historic mission. This doesn't mean that soon we should expect the appearance of Russian tanks on the streets of the capitals of NATO countries. Putin knows he can achieve his goals by discrediting NATO rather than defeating the alliance on the battlefield. Given this, the Kremlin is likely to choose the hybrid tactics used in the early stages of 2014 invasion of Ukraine. Indeed, it is all too easy to imagine unrecognizable Russian troops operating on NATO territory under the guise of the implausible denial. Russia sooner or later will be defeated, and the whole world have to unite against the Russian ambitions and Russian dictator. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, please share with your friends.